segments. One segment from the duodenum, one segment from the jejunum, and one segment from the ileum. So you want to look at all three segments and make sure you can differentiate the three parts of your small intestine from the slide, as well as some of the tissues that you're going to be looking for and seeing on here. So I'll just kind of go in order and make it a little bit easier on you. One thing you'll notice is when you get into the intestine, you're going to notice these big, long, finger-like structures. Okay, and so here's a nice extended finger-like structure called a villus. Okay, each villus contains epithelial tissue lining it, which is primarily what tissue? Simple columnar epithelial tissue. Okay, so when the intestine, we're talking about simple columnar. It's non-ciliated, but it has a lot of microvilli. And so you really won't be able to see the microvilli, even if you go up to all the way up to high power. You might see a fuzzy surface or a little thick surface. That's just the microvilli called the brush border on here. Okay, so you're going to be identifying the epithelium as simple columnar epithelial tissue. What's all this inside? What region is this known as? Two words. Lamina propria. Okay, lamina propria is made up of primarily what tissue? Areolar connective tissue, right. Okay, and so you'll notice that in the villi as well, all the way down at the base of the villi also. Now, periodically, as you scroll through these villi, you might be able to see in some of these a lacteal. I won't ask you about to identify the lacteal on the slide, but if you notice, if you look at a villi and you see the lamina propria, there's a little pink strip running through the lamina propria. That's what a lacteal would look like. Okay, but like I said, I won't. They're spread out, and there's a few slides that have them, a good one, and most of them don't. So I won't worry about that on your slides. But for starters, you want to make sure that you can identify the villi and the tissues. Now, how do you identify this as the duodenum compared to the jejunum and the ileum? We'll go down here into the submucosa, and you'll notice some glandular tissue. Okay, this particular glandular tissue that we're seeing here are your Brunner's glands. Okay, so all these kind of lighter circular structures are Brunner's glands. Okay, and that's something that you're only going to find here within the duodenal region. You won't see that in jejunum. You won't see that in the ileum either. Okay, and so that's one of the key characteristics that you're going to use. Also, another characteristic when you're looking at the epithelial tissue, you don't see a whole lot of goblet cells. Okay, there are some goblet cells here, but not an overabundance of goblet cells. What we're going to notice is that the further along the alimentary canal we go, the more goblet cells you're going to start seeing. So as we get to the jejunum, you'll see a few more. As we get to the ileum, you'll see even more. And even though we're not going to do large intestine, the large intestine almost looks like there's more goblet cells than there is simple columnar. Okay, so you're going to see fewer goblet cells mixed within the epithelial tissue. So that's something that you'll notice.
So on the exam for this, what are you going to show us at high power? Or are you going to show us this right here?
Depends on what I'm asking. I'm just asking you where in the body was this specifically located. I show it on scanning power or low power, to where you can identify the villi, you can identify the Brunner's glands.
Okay.
Okay. But if I want to know the specific tissues, right, I can't really ask you to identify. I mean, you should know that it's simple columnar epithelium. I mean, if I point right here and I say, what's the epithelial tissue of this structure, then you should know that, yes. Right. But if I'm looking at, if I want you to visualize the actual tissue, then I'll have to go up to high power. But most likely, right, just to identify the region, I'd say, okay, on low power, you'll be able to see a villus, the villi, and also the Brunner's glands. Okay. So, low power most likely. Okay, so from there, the middle segment is going to be your jejunum. And the jejunum, and this is a little semi-contradictory to what it says in the book. The jejunum itself is the longest part of your small intestine. And so, therefore, what its main purpose is for absorption of the nutrients. The duodenum does do absorption. The duodenum is for digestion and starting absorption, okay, of the nutrients. The jejunum, the main job, the primary purpose of the jejunum is absorb as many nutrients as possible. Okay, so what you're going to notice is that the villi are much more elongated in the jejunum than in the ileum, and we'll also see much larger than we'll see in the ileum here shortly. Okay, so you got these big, elongated, extensive villi. Same basic tissue, simple columnar epithelium. It's lamina propria in the middle. You see more goblet cells mixed in here as well. Also, you probably won't see any glands out in the submucosa. Hopefully you don't, because there really shouldn't be any there. And so, this is a good slide. But notice, when you look at the villi, they're big, long, extensive villi. Compare that to, let me go back real quick to, I mean, that's probably the longest villi you're going to see right there in the duodenum. So it's much smaller. So that's another important kind of differentiating feature. The last segment is your ileum. Again, the ileum tend to have much smaller villi. You're seeing a bunch of villi fragments. More goblet cells kind of spread out here. So if you go up to high power, you'll be able to see a lot more goblet cells. Also, when you look at the ileum, you're going to notice this big mass out here. This is the Peyer's patch, so it's lymphatic tissue. Peyer's patches are, remember, lymph nodes, so they're going to be producing or kind of housing a lot of the white blood cells, and then they'll deposit that into the lacteal, which goes out into the villi for protection. Okay, so you'll see these large Peyer's patches on the ileum section. Now here's where it gets a little bit fuzzy, because on your slide, you're only going to see the Peyer's patch on the ileum. The reality of it is, the Peyer's patches are along the entire length of the intestine, even down into the large intestine. Okay, just the sections that you have, you'll see Brunner's glands in the duodenum, you won't see any glands in the jejunum, and you'll see your Peyer's patches along the ileum. They're more concentrated as far as numbers along the ileum, okay, but in reality, there's Peyer's patches spread out along the entire length of your intestines. Okay, but this is where you're going to identify it, is on the ileum section. And so go through this slide, make sure you can identify the three sections, okay, of